Hare Krishna and welcome to session 3 of Pathways to Perfection, our online virtual journey through the 9 pathways to bhakti that are outlined by Prahlad Maharaj in the Srimad Bhagavatam. We're so delighted that you're joining us, and we're also streaming live on YouTube. This is a special series that's been organized by the Bhakti Center and co-sponsored by a number of other temples and centers in the region. So far, we have had an overview of the topic with Radhanath Swami. Many of you were there for that. And then we've had 2 sessions highlighting the first of the 9 pathways. We had a session on Shravanam, or hearing, with Radhika Raman Prabhu, and on Kirtanam, or chanting or glorifying the Lord, with Sri Prahlad Prabhu last week. To lead this morning's session on Vishnu Smaranam, or remembering the Lord, we are so delighted to have with us Radha Devi Dasi. Radha is a devotee practitioner of bhakti and has been since the mid-1980s, and she is a disciple of His Holiness Mukunda Goswami, who, as many of you might know, is one of Srila Prabhupada's senior-most disciples, one of the very first devotees to join and help to really found the ISKCON movement. Radha's thoughtful, deep presentations of Krishna consciousness combine her assimilation of Shastra with practical, relatable life lessons and application points, making her a crowd favorite among many audiences. And I'll just add on a slightly more personal note, my wife and I have really come to appreciate, Krishnangi and I have really come to appreciate Radha Mataji's lectures, her brilliant takeaway points, and it's something that we've especially recently really gravitated towards. Radha Devi has served in the New Govardhan community in California and at New Vrindavan in West Virginia as a temple board member, and she has also held roles in ISKCON communications and child protection offices. Along with her husband, Yudhishthir Das, she's been involved in congregational development and outreach since the early 1990s. In her professional life, Radha is an attorney. A graduate of the prestigious Harvard Law School, she currently practices law in the US, particularly in the realm of helping victims of domestic abuse. She has worked as a trained peer counselor for domestic abuse issues and has also taught at Chapman University School of Law and the University of San Diego School of Law. Radha Devi's lifelong work addressing injustices faced by women and children have also contributed to ISKCON's adaptation of these issues and in her role as ISKCON's international Vaishnavi minister. And this is all a testament to her deep commitment to caring for and honoring women and children within our own devotional community. On a personal note, Radha joins us today on her birthday. So we all wish her a very, very happy day filled with many blessings and the love and blessings of Shri Shri Radha Murlidhar and Gaurachandra Mahaprabhu. And we're also so grateful that she's making time to join us on her birthday. And so early in the morning, she's joining us from San Diego, where it's currently about 6 a.m. And so we're so honored and delighted to have her with us. Let's please give her a very warm Pathways to Perfection Bhakti Center welcome.
Hi, Krishna. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Extremely kind words. I hope someday to live up to them. And I'm grateful that all of you are here also, because this is the heart of Krishna consciousness is, devotee sangha, exchanging realizations. And, I'm not a very philosophical person. I don't have insight, into deep mysteries of the scriptures, but I've been doing this for a while, and I do have life experience. My birthdays remind me that, time is passing, and so I'm grateful to share some things that I hope will be helpful. Okay. So we're talking about remembering Krishna, right? And I think we first have to talk about what we mean by remembering, and then I'd like to talk about, some examples of what it looks like to have that smarnam, and then talk about some ways that we can develop also the smarnam. What does it mean? What does smarnam really mean? Well, English is such an imprecise language, and I can't judge whether it's more imprecise than other languages because I don't speak any other languages. But words have multiple meanings in English. So when we say remember Krishna, what do we mean? And in English, the word remember, it can mean different things. Usually we use it to mean something close to the word recall. That in other words, I have something in my short-term memory and I can pull it out when I need it. I remember things for tests. It also can be used to mean doing something that we said we were going to do. Did you remember to let the cat out, right? And then it's also used for emphasis. Remember this because it's really important. And these are fine meanings. Smarnam includes those, but that's not really what smarnam is all about. Okay, I remember Krishna in terms of short-term memory, right? If you trigger me to remember Krishna, I will. Talk about Krishna, sing about Krishna, all of these things, and I can bring these things into my mind, and I can bring the pastimes into my mind. I can bring the statements of the sadhus that I've learned into my mind. But that's not my default, right? My default is not to have my head full of Krishna, it's to have my head full of a lot of material things. So smarnam Prabhupada uses the word absorption. In other words, it's this constant awareness of Krishna. And Krishna actually gives us, kind of an instruction on what that looks like. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Yo mam pasyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati tasyaham na pranasyami sa cha me na pranasyati. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. Right? Which sounds good on paper, right? Okay, so see Krishna everywhere, see everything in Krishna, got it, right? But somehow, although I've read that verse, I don't know how many times, I still don't do it, okay? So part of it is, well, all of it actually is material conditioning, but we can break it down into some little pieces that we can work with. And the first is, at least for those of us who grew up in a Judeo-Christian culture. And I think more and more this influence is all around the world. But in the Judeo-Christian culture, heaven, the spiritual world, is somewhere far away. It's not on this earth, right? And so we don't, in that mindset, we don't live in a spiritual place. Spirituality is something that comes to us from outside, So as a consequence, it's very easy to just kind of divide your world into, okay, this is what I'm doing here in the material world, and this is what I hope to do later on somewhere else in the spiritual world. But the Vaishnav worldview is that everything comes from Krishna. Krishna is the source of everything. There is nothing that does not come from Krishna, right? The spiritual world is right here, right now. Christ said the kingdom of God is at hand. It doesn't mean it's imminently coming in from somewhere else. It means it's right here, right now. So why am I not experiencing that? Why is my consciousness not full with Krishna? Well, because I decided I wanted to try to enjoy separately from Krishna. And so, Krishna's allowed me to block out that realization. But this smarnam, if we deeply understand that, yes, Krishna is everywhere and everything is Krishna, then smarnam is the natural result, right? Because everything you see, you understand, okay, this is Krishna's energy. Now, how do I use it in Krishna's service? Prahlad Maharaj is the epitome of smarnam. Prabhupada says he's the Mahajan that exemplifies smarnam, constantly remembering Krishna. Right, so that's what we want to cultivate. But there's a second point about how and why kind of the Smaranam is so important. I wish I could remember if I read this, if this was something that Srila Prabhupada said or one of his disciples said. I can't remember, and I apologize. But the point was made that Prahlad Maharaj went through this experience, where his father's trying to kill him. He's going through all these austerities. Excuse me. That's like 1 year of his life. All right. And then after that, he rules for, years and years and years, decades and decades. Right. But the Bhagavatam doesn't talk about that. The Bhagavatam only talks about that 1 year. Okay. So why is that? Well, it's because that's the important year. And what's important about it? He's modeling for us how we remember Krishna in crisis, right? So again, if I go into the temple, I'm peacefully chanting japa, the deities are right in front of me. Yeah, I can remember Krishna. I've got this awareness going on. But when I'm under attack, when things are going wrong, when the material energy is kicking me around, do I then remember Krishna? That's the question. And it's important because by remembering Krishna at the end of our life, that's what we want to do, because that takes us back to Godhead. Krishna says, Anante kale cha mam eva smaranam mukta kalevalam ya prayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshaya. Whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt, right? So we want to cultivate a life where we can remember Krishna at the end. That's the test. That's the test of our consciousness. Have we really learned the lesson? In crisis, do we remember this? My husband and I had an experience the other day that, exemplified this point or made this point come into our consciousness. We were eating and he swallowed something wrong and started to choke. And it was really terrifying because he was really, struggling to breathe. And both of us were immediately focused on dealing with this crisis. Unfortunately, he was able to clear the blockage. Everything was okay. But afterwards, we realized, his total focus was on, how do I get this out of my throat? I need to breathe. I need to breathe. My total focus was on, what is the Heimlich maneuver? Do I remember how to do it? Should I do it now? Right? Neither one of us thought about Krishna. Right? So it was like, when you're in high school, you go into class and the teacher says, okay, pop quiz, and you go, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. It was exactly that feeling that, okay, Krishna, you just, gave us a pop quiz and boy, we failed that one, so again, Krishna gives us so many little nudges, like, got to do better, got to do better. So that brings me then naturally to the question of, okay, so how do we cultivate this Smaranam, right? And from my perspective, for whatever that's worth, is Smaranam has a lot to do with my mind. It has everything to do with my mind, okay? Because my mind, the information about Krishna is readily available. Right. And not just about Krishna, there's so many incarnations, also remembering the devotees is also remembering Krishna. There's so much to fill my mind up, to make it Krishna conscious. But somehow, no matter how much I do, still, I don't have that constant awareness of Krishna. So, I have to dig a little deeper, right? And Prabhupada, when he talked about this, dealing with the mind, he frequently cited that, wonderful prayer song by Govinda Das, Bhaja Manahure Srinandanandana Abhaya Charanaram Dindare. So the first verse, Govinda Das is saying, my dear mind, please take shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. And by doing this in the association of devotees, you can cross over this ocean of material suffering. And Srila Prabhupada, paraphrased that in a very nice way. He said, my dear mind, please stop driving so dangerously, right? Because as a spirit soul, we are riding in the vehicle of the body and the mind is the driver. And the mind is putting us at risk. Just like if you're, in a Lyft or an Uber and, the driver starts running red lights or whatever, you're going to be thinking, no, stop, stop. Right. And that's actually how I need to be thinking about my materially conditioned mind. And then Govinda Das says, how we're going to get the mind to stop driving so dangerously through the 9 processes of devotional service, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Padaseva, and so on. So, okay, so, Smaranam means constant awareness. It's not easy, but it will take us back to Godhead. It has to do with the mind. We need to engage the mind in these 9 processes of devotional service. And one of the things about these processes of devotional service, 2 things, I guess. One is any one of them can take us back to Godhead, right? But the other is most of us are not at a stage where we can fully engage in any one process, right? Sometimes, as a young devotee, you might think, oh, Haridas Thakur, all he did was chant all day, I'll be like that. I'll, isolate and have my little bhajan kutir and chant, so yeah, okay. How long is that going to really last? And the same with hearing, and the same with worshiping the deity. These are not processes that most of us can be 100% engaged in. But the nice thing about these processes is that they support each other, right? So being engaged in multiple processes fosters the ability to engage in more processes. And that's especially true of Smaranam. The more we're engaged in other processes, the more it fosters that Smaranam, that constant awareness, that Krishna consciousness. And that's really what Smaranam is all about, being conscious of Krishna all the time, right? And so we can talk about that more later. But okay, so I said I would talk about some examples, right? Some examples of what Smaranam looks like. And the first one is Prahlad Maharaj, but the other one is King Ambarish, right? And everything he did was oriented at Krishna. He used every one of his senses, every one of his facilities in Krishna's service. The eyes in seeing the deity, the ears in hearing the scriptures, the tongue in tasting prasad, the legs in walking to the holy places. So many things. That's what Smaranam in its ultimate form looks like, right? And for me, I have to meditate on these examples because I tend to get complacent. I'm so much more Krishna conscious than I was when I started. Okay, that doesn't mean I've come far. It means I started like way back down the road. So I sometimes kind of think, okay, well, I'm doing this. This process is working. I'm feeling good about it. And then I look at something like Maharaj Ambarish and I think, okay, slow your roll, Radha. You got a long way to go. So that's part of the benefit of having these examples. How do I get from where I am to where I can honestly say I see Krishna everywhere and I see everyone in Krishna? All right. One of the things I have to do, and part of this process of Smaranam, is I have to train my mind. Right? Krishna says, Bantur Atma Atmanas Tasya Yenatmaiva Yenatmaiva Mana Atmana Jita Anatmanas tu Shatrudeva Te Tatmaiva Shatruvatma. See, memory, right? Remembering. But for one who has controlled the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, the mind is the worst enemy. So is my mind my friend or my enemy, right? It depends on whether it's controlled by the intelligence, it's, controlled by the will or not. And my mind, when I came to Krishna consciousness, was completely unregulated and 100% materially conditioned. Okay. In 12-step programs, they have a saying, that an addict or an alcoholic alone is in bad company, right? And the reason is because the mind is going to tell you all these destructive things to do, right? So that's the unregulated mind. The unregulated mind is dangerous. Do not trust it, right? So a lot of what my mind tells me has to do with fear. My mind is excellent at drawing these pictures of the disastrous things that are going to happen to me unless I serve my senses or try to manipulate the material energy in some way. So for me, a big part of the process of Krishna consciousness was learning not to act on those fears. And it was when I raised my children, I got more realizations than from any other service I've ever done. And one of the realizations I had was, when you put a small child to bed alone, they don't like it because they're afraid. And that fear manifests in this, belief that there are monsters, right? There's a monster under the bed. There's a monster in my closet, and the child has to learn to trust the parent that, okay, you know what, this is not real, right? We have various ways that we might, teach our children this lesson, but ultimately it comes down to trusting the parent, right? And so similarly, my mind is the monster, right? And it's throwing all these pictures at me. And I have to trust Srila Prabhupada. I have to trust what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. I have to trust the instructions of my spiritual master, that I don't need to act on these fears, that I don't have to listen to what my mind says when it's telling me crazy things, because it does. And a corollary principle is that not everything my mind tells me is true, right? Which seems like, completely obvious. And that was something I really had no idea of when I first became a devotee, when I first started trying to practice Krishna consciousness. I had a belief system that if I thought a situation was a certain way, that was absolute reality. If I think you don't like me, I don't question that thought. I didn't even have the capacity to understand that what my mind told me could be wrong, So again, the unregulated mind is not trustworthy. And we can see how that depending on the mind is dangerous in a number of ways, but there are a couple that spring to my mind. And Hiranyakashipu and Kamsa both accepted a worldview that had very firm moral rules, right? They both were, Vedic citizens in a sense. But somehow they were able, without any pause, to violate these Vedic norms, based on what their minds were telling them. Hiranyakashipu wanted to kill his own child because he had this mind that told him, you are the most powerful. You are entitled to do anything you want to do in order to make that point to keep your power, even up to killing your own child, which is not okay in anybody's moral universe. And Kamsa, similarly, he's actually, a Vedic king in a certain sense. He's not very good at it, but that's the worldview he comes from. And not only is he willing to kill his own sister, but again, he's willing to kill children because his mind tells him, there's a threat of death. Death is the absolute worst thing that can happen. And anything you do is justified in trying to avoid death, right? So these are the crazy things the mind will tell us. And I personally have listened to similar crazy instructions from my own mind and, done things that I knew were wrong, but that my mind said, oh no, it's okay. You're justified. You can do this. You can be mean to this person because whatever you think they've done, right? My husband was chanting japa with Gunagraj Maharaj once, and Maharaj just started laughing, spontaneously just laughing really hard. And of course, my husband said, Maharaj, what's so funny? And Maharaj said, sometimes my mind tells me such crazy things, I have to laugh. Right. And that was such a powerful instruction, actually, that, oh, I don't have to take my mind seriously. I can laugh at it. And a lot of times my mind tells me things that are truly laughable. Okay. We can learn from the unregulated mind. We shouldn't follow the instructions of the unregulated mind, but we can learn from it. And Russell Brand, he's a comedian, but he's also a Vaishnav. He comes from a Vaishnav sensibility. And one of the things he wrote in a book that he wrote is this, I'll share with you. A pain in the leg means don't put pressure on the leg. a pain in the mind means change the way you live. All right. So when my mind is sending me these messages of fear and, anger and whatever, right? I don't want to act on them. I don't want to take them as truth, but they are telling me something important. They're telling me that somehow I've got a false belief, I'm having expectations that I shouldn't have. And for me, a lot of the times I have this expectation that I should be respected, right? And so for many, many years, I was, in a lot of conflict. I don't know how it is in this world. There are so many people who don't respect me. I don't understand this, right? But of course there are, because, I'm not inherently worthy of any special respect. We're all worthy of respect because we're all Krishna's parts and parcels, right? But, I'm not anybody special, right? And so for many years, I followed the dictate of my mind that if I could just make people respect me, then I would be happy, right? And in this process of Krishna consciousness, I've learned that I shouldn't expect respect. And whoa, to my surprise, guess what? I became happy or happier when I stopped expecting respect, because it wasn't about whether I was respected or not. It was about my expectation. Right? It was about my attitude. And so many times my mind is putting me in this position of just being ridiculous, right? And I don't see it until I question myself, like what is the belief that's really driving my behavior, right? Well, it's that I should be respected. Oh, wait, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu specifically told me not to expect respect. And then I can align my expectation, my mind has the correct instruction for me, and everything becomes more peaceful. Okay, so part of regulating the mind is also to understand that our minds are conditioned, and because of that conditioning, the instructions that we get in Krishna consciousness, we're filtering them through this material mind, right? Because we don't have pure consciousness. What we learn is filtered through our particular experiences and our particular worldview. Simple example that really has a lot of meaning for me anyway. When I was a young devotee, and I know I'm old because I keep saying when I was young, which is proof positive that I'm old. But when I first joined the Hare Krishna movement, there were a lot of young men and women at our temple, and a lot of these young men were trying to practice, brahmachari. They were living as brahmacharis. And so there was kind of a almost hostility sometimes, because you're a young man, you're surrounded by young women, you kind of got to go, no, 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 right? But there was one brahmachari who specifically seemed to have a real hostility for women. And, you could feel it. My material mind and my conditioning immediately assumed it was my fault, that he didn't like me. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I had done to offend him, But one day it kind of was brought home for me. Prabhupada gave the instruction that we should respect all women as our mother, right? And this brahmachari definitely didn't do this. And at that time, we had a phone in the temple, that all the devotees who lived around kind of shared. So I answer the phone, and it's this brahmachari's mother, and she wants to speak to him. My understanding of motherhood is, oh, it's great. His mom wants to talk to him. Isn't this nice? So I send somebody to, go tell so-and-so his mom's on the phone. And a long time passes. And then, the devotee that went to get him is like practically dragging him to the phone. You have to talk to your mother. You have to talk to your mother. And he's doing this because apparently this woman has been calling and calling and calling, and her son won't take her calls. Right. And I don't know what the story was between them, but it really gave me an insight to like, okay, this is the feeling he has about his mother. Right. So naturally, when you tell him to respect all women as his mother, his perception of what that means is not going to be the same as Srila Prabhupada's. Right. So many times, we are interpreting the instruction in a particular way due to our conditioning, due to how the mind reacts. Detachment. For many years, I thought that meant I had to not care. I had to not feel. It's not what detachment means. Detachment means not letting those feelings drive my decisions, right? So this kind of awareness of our own mental processes is necessary to clean out the mind so that we are capable of that absorption of seeing Krishna everywhere. And this has to be a conscious process. Krishna says the mind is going to wander. In Bhagavad Gita, he says the mind is going to wander and we have to bring it back. It's flickering, it has a flickering and unsteady nature. So from wherever it wanders, you have to bring it back to the self, right? And a lot of times we think that we can just chant Hare Krishna and read Bhagavatam and go to the temple on Sundays and bas, that's all we have to do, right? And that can be all we do. And sometimes that's all we can do, in that particular stage of our lives. But this is meant to be an interactive process, right? We're not just passive consumers of spiritual substance, right? And so part of that interactiveness means that we have to know how our mind is operating. In some sense, the mind can be likened to a computer, right? And it's running certain programs. And some of those programs are conducive to Krishna consciousness and some of them are not. And I'll give you an example. My programming, one of the programs that my mind received initially was the message that I'm not worthy, right? And so feeling that I'm not worthy, I interpret things that people do or say through that lens. I assess my ability to do certain things based on that lens. It affects everything, that underlying program. Well, Krishna, the scriptures, the sadhus, they tell me I am worthy, right? I can become Krishna conscious. It's not something that I'm left out of because I'm not good enough. Patita pavana, right? Sri Chaitanya came for the most fallen, so I'm actually maybe more qualified than others. So the question then becomes, who am I going to trust? Am I going to trust my mind or am I going to trust Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Obvious answer. But that means that I have to consciously be aware of this program that's running in my mind and, work on deleting it or minimizing it or whatever I can do. All right, so Smaranam, constant absorption, prerequisite, knowing what the mind is doing, right? And understanding, how it's affecting what we take in and how we react, becoming aware of that so that we can redirect where we need to. Third thing, how do we live, in such a way that we are developing Smaranam? And this has a lot to do with our environment, right? And how we set up our environment. Krishna consciousness really means to set up our lives in such a way that we are constantly reminded of Krishna, constantly engaged in Krishna's service, and that we can become so aligned with Krishna that our desires are all about service. That was one of the things about Maharaj Ambarish, that he had no desire other than to serve Krishna. All of his desires were around serving the Lord. So that's where we want to get, right? And if we're not conscious of setting up our lives this way, it's very easy to take, the life we start with and just add bits of Krishna consciousness here and there. Okay, I'm going to have the same association, the same activity, but I'm also going to chant japa. That's fine. Okay, but you can't stop there, right? You can do that for a while, but at some point we need to holistically think about, okay, have I set up my mind, or my life in such a way that I am pushed towards Krishna, that the very activities of my day are pushing me toward Krishna. A lot of us, when we start our Krishna conscious practice, we're young. Maybe, fortunate souls are born into this movement. But when you're younger, you can focus more easily on one aspect of life if you choose to do that. For example, you can live in an ashram. If you don't have a whole lot of other responsibilities, you can spend all day doing service at the temple. And that makes it, easier if we're constantly surrounded by devotees, deities, we're constantly engaged in direct service. Smaranam comes, you can't really avoid it. You'd have to actively try not to remember Krishna. Okay. But many of us have experienced that as we get older, we have more work responsibilities, then we have children, right? Suddenly, we're in situations where our environment isn't so much oriented towards Krishna. That direct reminder of Krishna isn't always there. And our minds get filled up with, all kinds of other thoughts and things we have to take care of. So we want to make sure that even in those circumstances, maybe even especially in those circumstances, our environment is pushing us towards Krishna. And many devotees, I think probably everyone, we have pictures of the deities, we have Krishna art, we have Krishna music, and we use those, and that's great. If the soundtrack of our life is kirtan, again, remembering Krishna becomes so much easier. And I know devotees who've taken, their workspace and, completely decorated it with Krishna consciousness. So at work, they're seeing Krishna, they're seeing devotees, they're being reminded all the time. This is great. But one of the things that we, especially as grihastas, can really focus on is putting our deities in the center of our lives, right? That if I understand my home is a temple, it belongs to the Lord, and I'm daily engaged in deity worship of some kind or another, relating to the deities in some way, that really helps, right? And what we can do is try to integrate our activities into, that relationship with the deities. It's just some simple examples. I really like decorating the altar, offering flowers to the deities, making flower vases. That's not a spiritual thing. It's just a material thing that I happen to like flowers a lot, and making arrangements. But because it's being used in Krishna's service, it helps me move toward Krishna. And back in the day, we used to decorate the temple for major holidays. And because we were untrained and materially conditioned, we used to steal a lot of the materials that we used to decorate the altar with. Our mood was kind of like, all of this belongs to Krishna anyway. So, we're going to help these householders who've decorated their yard so nicely. We're going to help them by taking some of this and offering it to Krishna. Right. But it developed in me the mindset that wherever I see a nice garden or nice flowers, I immediately assess, okay, would those look good on the altar? How easy would it be to get here at night and take them? And of course, I'm not going to do that anymore. But that's where my mind goes, right? And I don't mind that, because it helps me. I can just be walking through the neighborhood and I'm going to start thinking about Krishna. Oh, look, that would be so nice on the altar. My husband has this habit as we drive around, every nice house he sees, it's like, oh, that would make a great Nrsingadev temple, and for a while I was getting kind of annoyed, like, okay, yeah, it would, it's like the 100th house you commented on, but I realized it's Nrsingadev is in his mind. That's really nice to just walk around and think, oh, that would be nice for service in this way. That would be nice for service in that way. A lot of times we've built shopping for the deities into our recreation. It's almost like we're not even necessarily sure that we want to find the thing we're looking for the altar or for the deities. That process of going and looking for something for Krishna is sweet. So making it a game, an activity, a part of life where, yes, we're doing something for the deities every day, and we're always thinking, how can we improve the worship? What new thing can we offer to Krishna? The other thing is to fill up the mind, right? If you want to remember Krishna all the time, you got to fill your mind up. And Radhika Raman Prabhu talked about this so nicely, about how hearing and chanting and remembering, they all work together, right? And the point that he made about active listening is really important. What he said is that if we passively accept information, we don't absorb it or learn it as deeply as if we are actively engaged in mentally processing that information. And if you didn't hear his talk, definitely, go and listen to it. A lot of what he said had to do with a framework for looking at that information, assessing it, and working it deep into the consciousness. One of the things he said that I want to emphasize is this idea of sharing Krishna consciousness is a way to really absorb it. In other words, we're not just going to passively receive it, we're going to integrate it so that we then can share it. And Prabhupada actually recommended, he wanted all devotees to do this. One of the instructions he gave, he said, after reading Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, my disciples should then write. In other words, you should take what you've read and be able to integrate it and put it into a written form. And that really, really will help with this process of Smaranam, because it takes information from that, short-term data storage, can I recall it, into a much more conscious awareness of this information. One of the things that my husband and I have done in our congregational preaching is small groups. And one of the techniques that we stumbled on kind of by accident is the idea that rather than having a speaker who gives information, and then we have kirtan, that we would have discussion. And this largely started because, we didn't have a whole great list of speakers who wanted to come in and speak. So, what are we going to do? So we started this discussion, but we found that it's really valuable in terms of learning the material. And there's actually, a materially based, science of education, right, that talks about this concept of peer learning. That when we take information and try to share it with someone else, we actually learn that information much more deeply than if we just listen. Okay? So we can build that into our lives also. We can have, programs in our house, or we can meet with a devotee and read together and, tell each other what we think the passage says, what it means. We can write, so many ways. But my point is, this should be a conscious part of our practice. All right. We should ask ourselves, how am I mastering this material beyond just reading? Okay. Deity worship, putting Krishna in the center, building the life around Krishna, active learning, satsanga. Right? This is the one that I really cling to, because the other things I'm talking about, they take a certain amount of emotional energy, and I don't always have that. But sangha, sometimes all I can do is just show up, right? And the nice thing about devotees is that they will constantly remind you of Krishna. And devotees are the cause of devotional service, right? If you associate, the more you associate with devotees, the more service you're going to get, right? And sometimes we think that our association with devotees only counts in kind of a formal context. Like, I will go to the temple, I will go to a program where Swami is speaking, and, but association, creating a life that pushes us towards Krishna has room for, and I think even demands, the kind of association with devotees that is more casual. That, in other words, we should have devotee friends, right? We should socialize with devotees, right? Sometimes we think, oh, well, we can't do a mundane social activity with devotees. Well, if you're going to do a mundane social activity, better you do it with devotees than with anybody else, right? Sometimes we'll, just go over to devotee's house, and we have no particular Krishna conscious agenda, and maybe we're talking about, something mundane. But inevitably, Krishna comes into the conversation because we're talking with devotees, right? So the more association we can get, the better we'll be able to remember Krishna. Seeing everyone you meet as Krishna's devotee. This is a hard one, but I also believe that if we don't do this, we will not be able, unless you happen to live in a devotee community and never interact with anybody outside, in which case you're naturally seeing everyone as Krishna's devotee. But to the extent that we have to interact with people who are not externally practicing, a spiritual path, not trying to practice bhakti yoga, to the extent that we have to deal with those people, in order to cultivate this smaranam, we have to understand, we have to see those people as Krishna's devotees. right? Otherwise, we immediately begin to interact with them on a material level, and our consciousness is going to be pulled away from Krishna. And in my work in particular, I struggle with this because, let's face it, lawyers are not the most pleasant people to hang around. We're argumentative. We think we know everything, and we challenge everything everybody says, right? So if I relate to these people I'm interacting with as lawyers, it really drags down my consciousness because I'm arguing and debating, and it happens just like that. It scares me how quickly it happens. So I try to cultivate the idea that, okay, I'm talking to a devotee. They may not know they're a devotee, but that's who I'm talking to. And so how would Krishna like me to behave? And it's not that I go around with this saintly conception that I'm talking to devotees, everyone's a devotee, Hare Krishna. It's more that I start to slide into that mundane material mindset, and then I try to pull myself out. And then I slide into it again, and I try to pull myself out. But that practice is beneficial. Ultimately, everything comes from Krishna. And whether or not we can remember Krishna also is in Krishna's hands. This Smaranam, we do everything we can to cultivate it. We set up our lives, we, reprogram our minds, all of this. But ultimately, Krishna says, I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come, knowledge and remembrance and forgetfulness. This is all in Krishna's hands. So on the one hand, we understand that it is by mercy, it is by grace that we are able to practice any of these 9 processes of devotional service. Okay. The idea that somebody born in Kali Yuga, aside from those pure souls who come to help the rest of us, but somebody born in Kali Yuga would be qualified to approach the Lord is, of course not. How could we? But by the mercy of the devotee, by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and by the mercy of Krishna, we are given this opportunity. So understand that it's grace that we're waiting for, right? But also understand that we can open the channel. We can turn the receiver on so we can get the signal. That's our part that we have to do. Part of that is paying attention, right? When I, again, was a young devotee, I perceived this idea of Smaranam, of remembering Krishna, as being something I had to do, right? Something that's coming from me, and I'm going to work with my mind, set up my life, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to learn to remember Krishna. As I get older, I see that that's not actually how the process works. This is actually an interactive process. I am relating to Krishna, and I'm becoming purified by relating to Krishna. But it's actually a conversation. My whole life is a dialogue with Krishna, right? It's just that a lot of times I'm not paying attention, so I'm not hearing what he says. And most of the time, what I'm telling him is like a little kid, yeah, 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 I'm not listening, right? Krishna's talking, like, not going to hear it. That's the dialogue I'm having, but I can change that, and I want to change that. I need to change that. So starting to become aware of, when is Krishna talking to me? What am I saying to Krishna by my actions and my thoughts? And I had an experience, probably the most formative experience of my life, what involved raising my kids. But there's a compare and contrast moment that I want to share with you. When my son was a teenager, we went through, a lot of teenager anxiety. And there was a time when he wanted to go somewhere that he knew we were not going to let him go. And he decided that, for asking for forgiveness was better than asking for permission. And he just went. But he was gone for 3 days. All right. No note, no communication, no idea where this child is. And I died 10,000 deaths, in those 3 days. Deeply the most painful experience of my life, right? And that fear mind, what if, I envisioned his death, literally envisioned his death in so many different ways. I didn't think I was going to survive it. This is only 3 days, right? People go through torments for much longer, but for me, this was like beyond what I could handle. And I was trying to turn to Krishna, but I didn't have it. Now, this was a great blessing ultimately. I don't know for him, I don't know what he learned from it, but I learned from it that I had to deepen my connection with Krishna because I could not survive in that way. And he grew up, he's fine, he's a great father, upstanding citizen, wonderful, no problem. My daughter also went through her, teenage anxieties and got herself in a situation where she really was in a dangerous situation. It wasn't just, mother's mind speculating. She really was, facing some serious problems. But my experience was totally different because I knew that Krishna was going to take care of her. And I knew that because I was paying attention to the signals that Krishna was sending me. And this was such a lovely reciprocation. I had some concerns about her. I shared them with Radha Swami. And he said, okay, I'm going to pray, and sat down and he prayed for her. He got up and he left, right? And like 10 minutes later, my daughter's calling me with this crisis, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, this must be Krishna's arrangement because Radha Swami just prayed for you and now you're in this crisis and I'm not going to panic because I know Krishna's arranging this. Totally different experience, And so we can pay attention and we can speak with Krishna and listen for his answers. I thought at one point that I couldn't ask Krishna for anything, right? Because we're not supposed to ask Krishna for anything. We're supposed to just be servants. And also that I wasn't pure enough, like somehow I wanted to become perfect in my heart and then I would reciprocate with Krishna, right? Like, first of all, Krishna already knows all my flaws. I don't know why I thought that I needed to, try to keep them undercover or whatever, and also I can't become pure enough to approach Krishna without Krishna's help. So what was I thinking? So this conversation, just being aware that we're in this conversation, paying attention. And that also cultivates that smaranam, because if you're constantly looking for what is Krishna trying to tell me, well, that's the conversation we want to have. All right, so this idea that smaranam comes by grace, right? And this is something that really builds my faith, that I see how Krishna gives devotees what they need, right, in order to make advancement. And there's one particular example I want to share. Devotee named Radha Devi. She was, I think, in her 50s when she met Srila Prabhupada. So she was far and away the oldest, member of the Krishna consciousness movement for a long time. And then she lived to be, I think, over 100, right? She was very, very old. And she got dementia. Right. And this is one of my big fears, right? Because when your mind, your memory goes, like, then you don't have control over, what you're thinking about. And you can forget Krishna. And she really forgot a lot. People she had known for 40 years, she couldn't remember who they were, and it was a very difficult thing for her. She went through a lot of material austerity. And as she got older and older, less and less cognitive ability. But what was interesting was she always remembered that she had to chant her rounds for Srila Prabhupada. And she always remembered that she was waiting for Krishna to come and get her, right? So she got to the point where she would chant her rounds, but she would forget to pull the counter bead down, or maybe even just keep chanting around the same mala and not remembering that she had finished a round. So she's in this extreme anxiety every day of, I don't understand why I can't finish my rounds. Prabhupada's not going to be happy with me. Why am I not remembering to finish my rounds, right? Constant absorption on Srila Prabhupada and the holy name. And then she would also say, I'm so old. I'm so tired of waiting. Krishna, when are you coming to get me? And she was indignant. One of her peers left her body, and Radha Devi was like, that's not fair. I'm older than she is. Why is Krishna making me wait? But this was her constant meditation, right? So there's no question of what her destination was. All she could think about was the holy name, Prabhupada, and when is Krishna coming, right? And this is grace. This is a lifetime of service, a lifetime of centering your life on Krishna's desire and how to serve Krishna. And this reciprocation is so beautiful. So when I think, okay, I'm not so sure that I'm going to be there at the end of my life. I'm going to die thinking of, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done whatever, instead of thinking about Krishna. But I know that Krishna's grace will carry me. Whatever happens, Krishna's taking care of me. All right, final thoughts. The 9 processes of bhakti yoga, they are processes, right? So that means we do them repeatedly. It means progress comes in steps. In other words, if we fail at a process or we're struggling with process, don't panic, just keep trying. Even just the act of thinking, how can I bring Krishna more into my life? Even if we just think that, well, that's a meditation on Krishna, right? So that's valuable. And then just life advice, small changes, but make them permanent. Like, if you can go from 0 to 60, that's great. If you can, walk away from whatever responsibilities you have and just dedicate your life 100% to Krishna service, do that, right? But most of us, we're doing the step-by-step method. So small changes, make them permanent. And, I'm always gaining and losing weight because I don't regulate my eating, right? And whenever I lose the weight, then I go back to eating the way I was before and I gain the weight, right? So they're always telling me, small changes, but make them permanent, right? And that's especially true in Krishna consciousness. How can I make advancement? What can I do today that's stretching myself just a little bit farther than yesterday, but make it sustainable, make it something that you can keep doing and just keep moving forward. All right. Thank you so much for listening, for being there. And I'd really like to hear questions, comments, advice, corrections.
Thank you so much, Radha Devi. This was so nourishing. As always, Radhika and I, we avidly look forward to your presentations and questions and answers later. So there are some questions teed up, and I'll open it up for questions. I'll ask those questions on people's behalf in a minute. But first, I want to share a very brief presentation. So bear with me. So the Pathways to Perfection series, as you know, this is a 10-part series, and we are doing session number 4 today. So the first session was the overview, and now we are in the 3rd process of devotional service. Coming up, we have Hari Parshad Prabhu. I'll talk about him in a second. And then Gauranga Prabhu, Amarendra Prabhu, Archana Siddhi Devi, Bhakti Rasamrit Swami, and Sachinandan Swami. All great speakers. And if you miss the talks that we've had so far by Radhanath Swami, Radhika Raman Prabhu, or Sri Prahlad Prabhu, you can go onto our YouTube channel. Daniel from the Bhakti Center will put the information in the chat towards the end. So the channel is the channel name is Temple at Bhakti Center, and you can get those talks at that YouTube channel. This series is organized by the Bhakti Center and co-hosted by several centers who have come together so that we can all hear as part of Srila Prabhupada's family. Very grateful to ISKCON of New Jersey, or the Tawako Temple, ISKCON of Central New Jersey, ISKCON New York, which is Brooklyn, ISKCON 26 2nd Avenue, New York, the first temple that Prabhupada set up in the West, ISKCON of Bergen County, New Jersey, ISKCON of Richmond, Virginia, and Geetanagari Eco Farm in Pennsylvania. So thank you to all who have joined from all these centers. And of course, we have people from all over the world who have tuned in on YouTube as well as Zoom. The next session is by Hari Parshad Prabhu. He's a personal friend. He's also someone who is extremely learned. He is on the GBC Shastrik Advisory Council. He's a powerhouse of knowledge about bhakti, but even more than that, he's able to convey it in such a charming way. When he speaks, you can see he's totally in love with Krishna. He's totally in love with the process of bhakti. And so when you hear him speak, you automatically want to do whatever it is that is giving him so much joy. So he will talk to us next week about serving the lotus feet of Krishna. And that will be at the same time, same start time, 9 a.m. Eastern or 6 a.m. Pacific, that we started this session on. So with that, let me stop sharing and we'll start with our questions. So the first question comes to us from a college student, Surabhi from ISKCON of Central New Jersey. She's been a regular listener on this channel. When Arjuna was fighting, was he thinking of Krishna when he fought? How can we be absorbed in Krishna consciousness and remember Krishna when we are studying or working? That feels like multitasking, or is it not? Can you give us a practical solution?
In terms of the conscious thought in the mind, right? Yeah, unless you can think two thoughts at the same time, if you're studying, economics, you're thinking about, the material you're reading, and you're not consciously thinking about Krishna at that time. But that, and I'm going to struggle here because I'm talking about a concept I have not fully realized, right? But this understanding that whatever I'm doing for Krishna, that I'm studying in order to get a credential that's going to allow me to serve Krishna in this way. When I have a family, understanding that, I have this family in order to help these devotees become Krishna conscious, and they're going to help me to become Krishna conscious. Bhakti Tirtha Swami used to say, keep the goal in mind, right? So orienting our life and our understanding so that we see the connection between what we're doing and Krishna, right? That's the best answer I have.
Thank you. The next question is from Abhishek from Bangalore, or Bangalore as they call the city now. Normally you would think that Smaranam of Krishna should be when we have crossed the Anartha Nivritti path and we are at a purified level, but many of us may not be at that level. So how do we remember Krishna in our currently impure state?
Right. Reminders, right? We need lots and lots of reminders. I have these little sticky notes, these Post-its that I post all over to remind me of things I'm supposed to do. So we want a life full of like Krishna Post-its, whether that's our deities who are right there in the center of the house. So every time you walk by them, you think about Krishna, photographs, devotee friends, just as many Post-it notes as we can get. And then studying, really actively studying the scripture, hearing from devotees, just, put more and more Krishna in the mind. But yeah, until we're pure, we're not going to have that seeing Krishna everywhere and seeing everyone in Krishna. That's the pure devotee's mindset.
Thank you. Paula asks, or she says rather, she is new to Bhakti. She was introduced to Bhakti by her brother who lives and serves at Krishna House in Gainesville, Florida. But she's in a location where there aren't any devotees that she knows of. And her Sangha right now is mainly online Sangha. So she's wondering how she can move forward in her Bhakti and how she can approach devotees and express her desire to serve them and learn from them.
Yeah. Yamuna Devi told me once that everyone needs a partner in Krishna consciousness, right? Trying to be a devotee alone without devotees around is incredibly difficult. So I would encourage you to find somebody that you can correspond with, that, through virtual means. We've got lots of nice virtual means. Maybe through Krishna House, maybe there's somebody there who would be willing to have a weekly call with you or something, but just some regular interaction with a devotee who can give you some guidance and you can share your realizations with. And then sharing Krishna consciousness with as many people as you can, and that may be a very small way. Maybe it just means you're going to give them prasadam. Maybe it just means you're going to tell them something that you read that you thought was interesting and what do they think. But to bring Krishna into every relationship, however you can, because not only is that reminding you of Krishna, but, ultimately it will help make more devotees. So then, you create your own association. Definitely take advantage of all these online things, and yeah, I'm sorry that's not a more complete answer, but keep asking. Ask every devotee you come into contact with, and you'll get more and more ideas.
Yeah, and I mentioned to her that I'll put her in touch with a couple of lady devotees who she can interact with and move forward. Also, Paula, there are community groups that the Bhakti Center runs that she can join. They are obviously virtual right now, and she can join those. There are community groups for different levels, people who are newer to Bhakti, people who might be at an intermediate stage, and then people who want to go deep into that. So she can choose a particular community group and join those groups regularly. Thank you for asking that question. Brajahari Prabhu asks, we are given minute independence, minute free will. But what if our mind is repeatedly taking us away from turning towards Krishna? So in other words, we are misusing our free will. Is it okay to pray to Krishna, please take away that free will so that I can actually turn to you?
Really what we need is not, this is really a good question, actually, because the free will is not what we need taken away, right? What we need taken away is whatever is pushing us to make the wrong choice. Krishna's always going to give us a choice. My daughter used to ask when she was a child, why can't Krishna just make me be Krishna conscious, right? In other words, why do I have to go through this process of purification? Can't Krishna just do it? That's not how it works. But there's something within us that pushes us to make this choice. Whenever we know the choice is the wrong choice and we keep making it over and over again, there's something underlying that. And so we have to dig in and figure out what it is. It may be a belief system that's not working for us. It may be a past trauma. It may be a misunderstanding of how to apply the philosophy, but there's something going on underneath the surface. And so we need to pray to Krishna, please tell me what it is. Please help me get rid of it. This anartha, I don't know why I'm still making this wrong choice, but I obviously have an anartha, and please help me get rid of it.
Thank you. There's a question from Carolina or Chandravallabha. She asks, for those of us who are familiar with the process of Krishna consciousness, Vishnu Smaranam can mean we focus our mind on the deities of Krishna, for example, and we think of Krishna in his deity form. But for those people who might be newer, or they come from a Judeo-Christian background, for whom deity worship is not only unfamiliar but might be a no-no, how can we talk to them about Vishnu Smaranam?
Remembering spiritual pastimes, obviously we are taught and we believe, and it's true, that Krishna pastimes, are the most potent, that taking all this in the context of Krishna is the best. But even non-Krishna spiritual pastimes cultivate, Smaranam. Devotees, remembering devotees. In some sense, that maybe even is more important than Vishnu Smaranam is Vaishnav Smaranam. That, we know so many people who come to Krishna consciousness because of Srila Prabhupada. Everybody initially came to this movement because of Srila Prabhupada. They didn't know who Lord Vishnu was at all. But still to this day, there are devotees who came because they read about Prabhupada, and his character is so appealing. So deity worship is powerful and potent, but there's so many ways to cultivate spiritual consciousness, God consciousness. And especially if we're dealing with people who do come from a different faith tradition, it isn't always necessary that they change that right away. In fact, I've worked with quite a few devotees who are Christian, still, but came to this as Christians. And instead of, because our programs, it's like, we just accept you how you are. That's how we start, And so nobody asked them to stop being Christian. That never came up. And over the course of time, by chanting, like, they became more willing to accept what seemed like an unfamiliar process or not an acceptable process.
Thank you. There's a question from Lajja Sheila. Thank you for sharing the story of your husband's choking episode. If that were to happen again, do you think you would do something differently? Was it a nudge for you to remember Krishna more?
It was definitely a nudge. It was definitely a sign to me that my consciousness is not where it needs to be. And I don't know if I would do it differently. I do know that I have to work harder, on putting more Krishna in my head and my heart. And maybe if it had gone on longer, maybe when we really got desperate, we would have remembered Krishna. Who knows? But, for me, it was just that reminder, that nudge. And my birthday also is a reminder, the gray hairs in my head. It's like, yeah, this test is coming. There's no doubt about it,
Thank you. And if I may, something I heard from His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrit Swami, who is going to be on this series later on. So something that he said, the way we can practice Smaranam, and specifically in response to her question, Lajja Sheila's question, that when something happens to us, like we nick our finger or we stub our toe or, anything that happens, and instead of calling out something else, why not practice calling out Krishna, Govinda, Murlidhar, like that, or Hare Krishna. And over time, what will happen is it becomes ingrained in us. And the other thing, it ties in with what you were saying, Radha Devi, having reminders all around us. So for example, Vaisheshika Prabhu talks about this also, keeping your beads visible so that the moment you get up, you actually see them and your mind immediately goes to Krishna. Bhakti Rasamrit Swami, I've heard him talk about, for example, as soon as we get up, practicing just chanting Hare Krishna, the first thing that we consciously do is to chant Hare Krishna, just call out Hare Krishna. Or if there is Bhagavatam or Gita in the room where we are sleeping, offer obeisances to that book, knowing that the book is not different from Krishna. So these are all little tips that can help us to practice for that final moment when we will be tested. So more questions coming in. This is from Soumya and Hari from Cleveland, Ohio. We are parents of 2 teenage boys. My younger son asked me last week, Krishna is so merciful and loving. Why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? Why do God-conscious people seem to suffer a lot, or sometimes it seems they suffer the most? And isn't it rude to say to someone that it is your karma that you're suffering? So I guess there's a few questions there.
Mm-hmm. Krishna's goal is for us to become God conscious. Whatever it takes to get us there, that's what he does. I said before, when my son decided not to come home for 3 days, I suffered intensely. I can't express how much I suffered. And that was Krishna's mercy. That was Krishna's mercy. It really propelled me forward in Krishna consciousness in a deep way that would never have happened if I hadn't been suffering so intensely. So he's not sentimental. He's giving us what we need for the ultimate goal. And this material life, it seems so all-encompassing right now, but when we go back to the spiritual world, it's going to be like a bad dream that we had, right? This suffering, just like everything else is temporary, the suffering is also temporary. And, like a loving parent says, okay, you have to do this particular austerity, whatever it is. And the child says, that's not fun, I don't want to do it. But the loving parent says, no, it's necessary. So this is also Krishna's mood. And then the idea of, yeah, it's your karma, devotees are supposed to be compassionate, right? That's not a very compassionate response, and it's not helpful. One of the things that we can think about when we interact with people is, am I helping this person become more Krishna conscious? Am I helping them to make advancement? So if somebody will make advancement by being chastised, that's love. If somebody will become more, open to Krishna consciousness, or get through a hard time leaning more on Krishna by giving them empathy and sympathy, that's love. And most of the time when we're in the middle of a crisis, I mean, just think about it on the receiving end. If I'm in pain, telling me that it's my karma, it shuts me down. It's not helpful in any way, and I know that it's my karma. That's not the point. That kind of conversation is for when we've gotten through the experience and we're not in a painful crisis.
Thank you. Sachipriya Devi asks, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I would love to get some tips on creating nice sanghas and small conversational exchanges in small groups. What are your tips or secrets for success that you have found over the years in your own cultivation of sanghas with your husband?
Yeah, we started doing this because Guna Gai Maharaj asked us to, and the first program we have, I don't remember if there were 0 guests or 1 guest, right? And so of course we were discouraged, and Maharaj said, just keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. And that's really the secret, is have a time and a place that's regular and just keep showing up. Everyone that we would interact with, every devotee or every, newcomer that seemed like they might be interested, anybody at all, invite, and just don't get discouraged. And even if it's just one other person, that's incredibly valuable. Like it didn't occur to me, early on, but it's not really how many people are there. It's the quality of the exchanges, right?
Thank you. There's a question from Venkata Bhatta, our host for today. He says, the point you made about how it's a dialogue and not just our efforts really resonated with him. But many people are used to being achievers in every aspect of life. So they strive for things, and they're always in high gear about achieving something. So how do we shift from being achievers to being grateful receivers instead?
Yeah, that's a question that really resonates with me too, because that was a big struggle that I'm still having. This false ego that tells me I'm not good enough, and therefore I have to show all of these achievements so that I can be considered good enough. And one of the things that was such a relief for me was this idea that I'm so fallen, I have no good qualities, only by the mercy of my spiritual master can I do anything. And when I first heard it, it was kind of like, okay, that sounds like low self-esteem. But later I realized, what, that actually takes a lot of the burden off my shoulders, right? I don't have to achieve, on a material level. It's not up to me. It's not why I'm here. My goal is to learn to love Krishna. And it also opened up for me the opportunity to stretch myself, because that's really where we grow in Krishna consciousness, is when we go out of our comfort zone and do something for Krishna that's new or challenging, right? But if we're overachievers, we want to master things, right? So we don't want to go into that uncomfortable area because we might not achieve there, right? So that freedom to say, okay, I'm little, all I have to do is try. I'm not responsible for how it turns out. I just have to try my very best. That's all Krishna's asking for me. It was just so freeing, and so that idea of achievement and perfectionism, and it's the false ego. It's the false ego, and it's, as I said before, this idea that if I just manipulate things in the proper way, I'll become happy, right? And then you realize that no, you become happy by saying, okay, I surrender. Yeah.
Thank you. Shrivas Chandra Prabhu asks, and by the way, all these people I'm asking on behalf of, most of them are saying, wonderful class, thank you. I'm not calling that out, but that's a general theme.
That's fine. Krishna is wonderful.
We can, you mentioned that Smaranam is not a one-sided process. We can see our whole life as a dialogue with Krishna. Does this mean we constantly ask or say something to Krishna and then try to look for answers? Could you please share some insights on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably personal to the person, but yeah, that's definitely, I go through my day with a running commentary, between me and Krishna or me and Lord Nityananda, and 90% of my side is going, okay, I know I didn't do that right. I know I'm acting on my own material desire right at this moment, but I'm still hoping for your mercy. And again, for me anyway, this is why Krishna brings me to my knees so often, because that's where I really do the most talking and the most listening. I know some devotees that write a letter to Krishna or to their spiritual master every day, just pouring out the heart.
Thank you. Gail from New Jersey asks, in the context of your talk about the unregulated mind, you said that the mind sometimes misinterprets our circumstances. For example, I might think someone does not like me when actually that person's body language might mean something else. So why or how would such misinterpretations be the product of an unregulated mind?
The mind, it makes associations based on the pathways that have been created. So if my mind has been conditioned, as mine was, to believe that I'm not worthy, right? Every piece of information that comes in is going to be filtered through that I'm not worthy, right? And that is the sense in which I mean the mind is unregulated. In other words, it has these pre-existing programs, that are running that are not correct. They're not Krishna conscious. And so if I'm not aware of that, I can't just go on what the mind says. And so I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I hope I am.
Thank you. We'll probably end with one or two questions. Manish asks, regarding our kids when they act out, how do we depend on Krishna in these situations, and how do we remember Krishna in these situations rather than become indifferent or try to do what seems right to us?
Yeah. The lesson I learned raising my kids that I wish I had known going in is that these are individuals with their own relationship to Krishna, and my job is to help them deepen their relationship with Krishna. So if we start from that standpoint and think in terms of how do I need to respond in order to help this person become more Krishna conscious, that just reframes everything. For me, I thought I was supposed to turn out children like a product that ended up looking a certain way, right? It didn't work. And was also quite painful for them, I know. So I think it's like, if we have the right goal in mind, then it becomes more clear how we're supposed to interact with these children. And I don't know any parent who hasn't, had to try something and see that, okay, that's not working out very well, let me adjust. It's not, raising kids is not like, baking a cake. You put certain things in, you get the same product out every time.
Thank you.
Also, one other thing is I would take more advice from senior devotees if I were raising kids again, you know.
Thank you. And Gail texted me saying perfect. So your answer was very
Thank
nice.
you.
Gail always asks the best questions in every sangha she's in. So one last question, and then we will close out with a very brief announcement and open up the Zoom Sangha for people to say Haribol and hello to Radha Devi. So the last question is, I try to remember Krishna in the midst of, and it's from Anonymous, I try to remember Krishna in the midst of material activities like watching a movie or something else, but I feel it ends up feeling artificial and forced. Any advice?
Maybe reassess whether these activities are necessary or useful. You know, I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with watching a movie, you know, that's fine. But understand that maybe this isn't the best thing for helping me remember Krishna 24/7. And at what point am I, you know, going to be willing to make a change because I value relating with Krishna more than the movie, and not to shame anybody or make you feel bad, you know. I've spent a lot of times watching movies myself, but just, you know, to understand that, yeah, that's not the thing that's going to get me where I want to go.
Thank you. So we are out of questions. And before I hand back to our host, Venkata, someone anonymously, well, they were not anonymous to me, but they wanted to be anonymous here. Someone anonymously texted a comment saying that your classes are like the purest of ice cream, or you know, vegan ice cream if you're vegan, for example. Simple ingredients put together wonderfully, and no bells and whistles, but they are so powerful and impactful and relishable and endearing. So I'm just reading out from the text. So they wanted me to say that, but they didn't want their name quoted. So with that,
Movies are so encouraging.
and that same person also appreciated your crisp answers and said, must be from your Harvard Law School training. So with that, I'd like to hand back to Venkata Bhatta to close this out, and then we will open up the Sangha for a few minutes for everyone to say hello. Venkata?
Thanks, Yashoda. And thank you, Radha Devi, for just an amazing talk. Just want to echo that anonymous compliment that was paid. I really feel like today is your birthday, and in this wonderful Vaishnav spirit, you've given us all such a gift. So we're just so, so grateful for that, and we hope to continue to have your association and your inspiration. Before we close out and open up, as is our tradition, has become our tradition, open up for folks to be able to say Hare Krishna or Hari Bol to you, and to express their gratitude to you. I just wanted to point out, and I believe it's there in the chat box, but if not, perhaps it can be reposted in the chat box, that there are many, many ways to stay connected with the temple at the Bhakti Center. Sometimes this point comes up, and I know I've heard this from some folks, and I imagine others have heard it as well, where sometimes there's an impression that perhaps for the Bhakti Center, there's a lot of emphasis on outreach, particularly for those who are newer to Bhakti. And while that's something that we're incredibly excited about and proud of with the Bhakti Center, we are equally excited about and proud of the temple at the Bhakti Center community, and especially being able to provide resources like this one, like this series, for folks to go deeper, for practitioners of Bhakti to go deeper in their practice, and to really form and foster deep relationships with one another. And that's what we're aiming to offer in our own modest way. So in reflecting on so much of what you've shared with us, Radha, the idea of one of the ways that we can remember Krishna is by remembering and staying connected to Krishna's devotees. And so in that spirit, we want to encourage everyone to stay connected with us at the Temple of the Bhakti Center. The information is there in the chat box, but you can connect with us through receiving our newsletter, being a part of the WhatsApp group, tuning in to YouTube, where talks like this one will be found, following us on Instagram, and of course, connecting to the Bhakti Center website. So please do go ahead and avail yourselves of that. Also, I just wanted to reiterate something that Yashodhalal Prabhu said in reference to one of the questions that was asked in terms of staying connected, particularly in our suddenly virtual world that we find ourselves in. One really powerful way to stay connected wherever we are in our bhakti journey is through community groups. And so there's information on community groups there in the chat box, but we offer community groups at various levels, beginning bhakti, growing bhakti, and deepening bhakti. And there's so many opportunities to connect with the Bhakti Center and to connect with each other. So that information is in the chat box as well. And we really invite everyone to, as they say, don't be a stranger. The Bhakti Center is designed to be community, both real in terms of the physical space, when Krishna willing, we'll be able to soon gather regularly again in the physical space of the building, but also virtually. So wherever you are in the country or even around the world, we invite you to be part of our community and to help us to co-create this beautiful community of absorption in Krishna. Thank you again. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Radha Devi. And at this point, I'm going to ask for everyone to be able to unmute themselves, and if they'd like to offer some words of greeting, perhaps a birthday wish, and to express our gratitude to Radha Devi. Thanks so much, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, happy birthday.
Hare
Thank you.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mata Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Conscious Mataji.
Hare Krishna consciousness birthday Mataji.
Hare Krishna, happy birthday.
Hare Krishna
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, happy birthday.
Hare Krishna Mataji, happy birthday.
Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Hari Bol Mataji, happy birthday.
Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol.
Happy birthday.
धन्यवाद माताजी. धन्यवाद. Hare Krishna Mataji. Nice class. Very good.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Nice class.
Hare Krishna.
Nicely explained, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol, Hare Krishna.
Wonderful.
birthday.
Very
Hare
nice.
Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful class. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol, Hare Krishna.
Happy birthday. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Happy Krishna. That.
Very nice class.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, happy birthday.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
birthday.
May you never take human birth again.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Bol.
Thank you for sharing your personal example. So nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy birthday. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Thank you. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai. Hare Bol.
Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.
Happy birthday Mataji. Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
Happy birthday, Mataji. Hari Bol.